In the last video, when we were discussing profit maximization, we left off with a question, right? And the question was, so if it turns out that for maximizing profits, it doesn't make sense to sell all 700 seats in this auditorium, right? We sell maybe 400 or 500, depending on the particulars of the example. Doesn't it seem strange, right, to leave those seats empty? Are those empty seats somehow being wasted? And one way to think about it is that it seems possible that we should be able to sell those seats at a price for which the price of the ticket is greater than the marginal cost of providing the film. So in the first case where the marginal cost was 0, there's 200 empty seats. We sold 500 tickets. There's 200 empty seats. Why can't we just sell those tickets to people for some price, right? At whatever price they pay is still greater than 0, and it seems like it would be worth selling to them at that price. In the second case where the marginal cost was 2, right? As long as we could get people to pay a price greater than 2 to buy those tickets, again, same thing, seemed to be worth it. But we know what the problem here is, right? At least we hinted at it in the last video, which is if we're going to charge that lower price, we're going to charge it to everyone, right? We can't charge different prices to different people, or can we, right? This is the question, right? And one way to think about this is that you can see that leaving the seats empty is efficient. That is, not selling those extra tickets. Leaving seats empty is efficient if the cost of discriminating among potential buyers is greater than the revenue generated by doing so. Right? So what does that mean, right? We'd like to be able to find buyers who would be willing to pay a couple bucks, $3, $4, whatever, for those tickets, right? Who wouldn't otherwise buy tickets, right, at the regular price, and sell them to them. But somehow we have to know who those buyers are versus the buyers who are willing to pay the full price. So the key here is to find a way to discriminate between these two different groups of buyers that's low cost and doesn't let them fool us, right? What we don't want is people who would pay the higher price to say, no, I don't want to pay the higher price, I'll only pay the lower price. Okay, so there's plenty of examples of this, and notice that word discriminate in there, right? I want to pause on that for a second, right? That word discriminate, we often has a negative connotation to it, right? When we say people discriminate against someone. And in the context of this discussion and what we're going to in a moment define as price discrimination, okay, the word discrimination here just means to distinguish, to separate, right? To discriminate among, that is to separate, to say these two things are different. We want to make this thing a different thing from that thing. In the context we use it in economics of price discrimination, there's no negative connotation there. There's no sense that we're somehow harming a group necessarily. We're just distinguishing. And in fact, it might be better to say price distinguishing than discrimination because of the way that word has come to be used. But we call this process price discrimination. Okay? So for example, with the case of the movie theater, one thing we might do is to say, why not charge a different price to faculty and staff and to students? Okay? In particular, think back to our discussions from Chapter 3, where we were talking about the demand curve, and in particular we were talking about elasticity, right? One of the things that we discovered there, right, is that people have different elasticities, right? And if you lower the price for people whose demand is elastic, you will generate, right, you will bring in buyers, and that will increase total revenue. So one of the things that we want to think about as we think about this sort of idea of price discrimination here is, can we separate our buyers into two groups with differing elasticities and charge the group with whose elasticity is higher the lower price? Okay? And again, in the case of the movies on campus, this is pretty straightforward, right? We know students' elasticity, the demand elasticity for almost anything, but certainly for things like this, is higher than for faculty and staff, right? It's more elastic. Students are more price sensitive. They're poorer, right? You might have other cheaper options. Faculty and staff are willing to pay higher prices and don't care so much about getting the discount. So if we can find a way to separate out the faculty and staff from the students, this could conceivably work, right? And we see regular movie theaters do this all the time with student discounts and senior citizen discounts, right? Notice here what's happening. First of all, let's get a definition in play. If you have the PowerPoint, you can flip over to slide number 12. Our definition of this process of what we call price discrimination, is charging different buyers different prices that are not linked to differences in cost. So charging different buyers different prices that are not linked to differences in cost. So this is not like when you charge someone cheaper because they're buying more of the good, right? Volume discounts. It might in fact be cheaper to provide the good at a bigger volume. Think about the large, giant boxes of cereal at Costco that are cheaper, right? That's not price discrimination because there really is a cost difference there, right? Or if there were some reason that it was more expensive to show the film to adults, to faculty, staff rather than to students, right? That would be different, but it's not, right? Costs the same to show the film to everyone. And again, we see lots of examples of this all the time, right? We've talked about some of them. We explored the idea of why airlines charge different prices. We think about why you guys have different amounts of financial aid, right? There's all kinds of examples where where sellers engage in this process of price discrimination. Coupons, another one that we talked about earlier on as well. But you can think about student discounts and senior citizen discounts as being the most obvious. So what could our friend Ed Syke here do? Our friend Ed Syke here could, right, charge different prices to faculty members, faculty staff members, and different prices to students, right? And so if you look on page 192 at figure 8 number 4, you can see this. We could have separate demand curves for each group, and we could set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost separately for the two groups. So for example, students, we might charge $350 and sell $175. Faculty staff, we charge $650, sell $325. Interesting thing about that is, if we do that, we're selling 500 tickets just like we were in our very first example, but we make more revenue because we're charging the people whose demand is less elastic the higher price, and the ones who are more elastic, we're drawing them in with a lower price, and the gains from the folks who will pay the higher price outweigh what we give up compared to the first example by charging the students less. In fact, you do the calculation, total revenue is $27.25 as compared to $2,500 this way, and profits are up from $300 to $525. Again, assuming the zero marginal cost case. What's the problem here? Or what's the potential problem here, right? What other problem does our seller have to solve? Well, think about what you might do, right, if you were a sort of crafty person, right? If you were a student, you might go up to the ticket window and say, hi, I'm a student. I'd like to buy 50 student tickets, please. And then you might go hang outside the theater and sell those student tickets back to faculty and staff at a price more than you paid for them, but less than the $650 that they would have to pay otherwise. If you could do that, right, you would undermine the whole price discrimination thing here, right, and you would the seller would be losing money. So from the seller's point of view, it's not just enough to be able to identify the two groups. The seller has to be able to prevent resale of the product, right? Has to somehow make sure that people who buy it cheap can't resell it to the other group at a cheap price. Couple of obvious ways to do this, right? One is to put a limit on the number of tickets you can buy, right? That would do this. But also print different tickets, right? If it was just a thing on college campus, you have one rule that the yellow tickets are for students, the red tickets are for faculty and staff. And certainly what the regular movie theaters do, it prints out, it says on it, student price or student discount or senior discount or a regular price. So the ticket taker knows, right? There's no way to resell that ticket to anyone. The airlines, by the way, have rules that prevent you from reselling airline tickets, right? So firms try to put things in place that prevent that from happening. But if you can prevent resale, right, you can do this. And the interesting question is, who gains? Is this a good thing, right? And I think the way to think about this is that in cases of price discrimination, what's mostly happening is that by charging the less elastic folks the higher price, you're enabling more people to have access to the good than would otherwise. If airlines couldn't charge discounted prices for leisure travelers, if movie theaters couldn't charge student discounts, right, couldn't engage in student or senior citizen discounts, they would the students and senior citizens wouldn't. There would be many fewer who would get the opportunity to go to the movies. Same with leisure travel. If airlines didn't offer the lower price for people who are traveling leisure as compared to business, right, leisure travelers simply wouldn't travel. So it's not that what's happening here is that the people who are paying the higher price are being unfairly charged the higher price. Rather, their willingness to pay that higher price makes it possible for the cheaper group to be able to access the good at all. Otherwise, they simply wouldn't have it. So price discrimination is one way of allowing new buyers to have access to the good by separating them out into these different elasticity groups. One last thought on all of this discussion of profit maximization. Let's just remember what it is that firms are doing here, right? Price searching firms do this in 3 steps. The first thing they do, and this is summarized again on slide 13 here, first thing they do is they estimate their marginal costs and their marginal revenues. They don't know for sure. They're trying to figure it out. Given those estimates, they find the quantity that if they sold that quantity, it would ensure that marginal revenue equals marginal cost, that they were profit maximizing, and then what price would they have to charge to ensure that they sell that quantity, right? So it's estimate marginal cost, marginal revenue, find out at what quantity they are equal, and then to sell that quantity, what price would you have to charge, right? So you can think about that last step as being looking at the demand curve, right? Given that, if that's the quantity we want to sell, what price do we have to charge to sell it? That's what firms do. But in the real world, it's important to understand, right? They're estimating all this. They're making their best guesses. They are searching. They're groping. They're just trying to discover exactly what their marginal revenue and marginal cost curves look like, what that price and quantity are. It's not as if they have all this information in front of them and they just pick one and maximize profits. They're constantly experimenting, constantly trying to figure out, should we adjust our price? Should we adjust this? Should we adjust that? Maybe we were wrong about our costs. Can we cut our costs, right? All of these things are happening, right? And from the perspective of those firms, the way they know that they have messed up is by looking at their profits. Certainly if their profits are negative, right, that's a pretty good sign that perhaps they need to make some changes, right? Even with positive profits, they might think, can we do better? What can we do differently, right? So the profit and loss system helps price searching firms understand whether they've made the right decision about what price to charge and how much to sell, and they slowly over time figure this out. It's not as if firms know, again, what their marginal revenue and marginal costs are. They really don't, but they're trying to figure out what those are, and they can sort of know when they've messed up by watching the flows of profits and losses. So again, profits and losses, as we said in the previous chapter, key coordinating signals. Now we understand a little bit more about how those tie in with the pricing decisions of firms, why firms charge the prices they charge, and how they make those decisions. So those, again, I think are the key lessons here from chapter 8.